putting on a collared shirt, and I was like, no.
Well, I have to come into the office.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of our OilComm pre-event webcast series. My name is Jeffrey Hill. I'm the conference director for OilComm, and today I'm joined by two of our good friends and advisory board members, Timothy Jackson from Diamond and Dennis Brewer from BP. Tim, Dennis, how are you? Welcome to the first OilComm webcast.
Well, thanks for having us. Doing well.
Yeah, doing well. Thank you.
How was your Memorial Day weekend? Did you head to a crowded beach? Seems like everyone did.
No.
Not with all the rain around here in the morning. Typically for Memorial Day, we're out putting flags at the cemetery, but that was canceled, so that was kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
Just stayed around the house, enjoyed the rest and relaxation.
Yeah, same here. That's pretty much what my weekend was. But we're now back from the long weekend, and what we're here to talk about today is the new normal for the oil and gas industry. And just to preview a little bit about what we're going to talk about today during this webcast, when we talk about the new normal, what we mean by that is not the new normal for the entire industry, but what is the new normal for oil and gas technology. Tim has prepared a really great presentation here, and he and Dennis are both going to share the presentation duties. But what we're going to go over here is how do the economics of the oil price drop and the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, how do they impact what we're doing with technology in the oil and gas industry? We're not really going to talk about oil and gas economics, like industry-wide economics, like the day-to-day oil price change, but we are going to address like what's the difference between when it was at $20 versus when it was at now it's at 35 is the last time I checked. We're also going to provide an overview of the differences between how COVID-19 and the oil price drop impacts the industry, and then what the overall impact of these two things happening at the same time has been. And then Tim and Dennis are also going to talk a little bit about timelines, like how they're dealing with these challenges in both the short term and also preparing for the long term. And then we're also going to talk about, like, how do we flip that magic back to normal switch? Are we ever going to flip it? Are we ever going to return to an old normal? So with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Tim and Dennis and their presentation, and we'll get started. And then if anybody watching wants to ask a question directly to the speakers, you can use the comment section and ask us a question. We'll get to those at the end. We also have some questions that we'll ask Tim and Dennis as well. So Tim, Dennis, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you again for having us. Appreciate the opportunity, Jeff and Mike, for us to be the first presenter in the series on for OilComm. So as Jeff alluded, neither Dennis nor I are work for Rystad Energy, so please do not take any of our comments as investment advice. And also note, Dennis and I are not speaking on behalf of our companies, but more as OilComm advisory board members and technology, IT and OT professionals.
Great. You want me to read it, Jen?
No, I thought Jeff was going to read it. Just
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I figured you have it in your PowerPoint. You did all the work.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But Tim, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Dennis, you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So my name once again is Timothy Jackson. I go by Tim Jackson or TJ here at Diamond Offshore. I am currently the Chief Information Officer here. I've been in IT approximately 30 years now, and 22 of those years have been spent in oil and gas, supporting oil and gas from an IT perspective, whether that's a programmer. I've been a DBA, a business analyst, a IT area manager for both on the operating side, E&P side of oil and gas, as well as oil and gas companies supporting E&P majors like Dennis, which I'm currently in a role right now. I have to be nice to Dennis. So
he's not always nice. He's not always. No, I'm just kidding.
So additionally, I am a member of the OilComm Advisory Board. I am also a member of the Gulf Coast Association of Continuity Planners. I'm a former Six Sigma black belt. I like to say a recovering Six Sigma black belt. I do have a certificate from Rice University in energy management, and I earned my degree from Southern Illinois, proud Saluki, back in 1990.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. Six Sigma black belt sounds so Tom Clancy. I don't know. I would hang that certificate right on the wall. You could see it right when you walk in. But yeah, so thank you so much, Tim. Dennis.
All right, so I started my career early as an enlisted Marine. Went back to school, got my degrees. Been in oil and gas for 13 years, 12 of them working with BP, doing field telecoms. My background was in the interim was with mobile and fixed carriers globally. Did a lot of. I was a European sales director for a little while. Back in engineering in about 2008 ish. So I've been speaking at various conferences in cybersecurity, field telecom. I'm the OT guy. If you ever come out to the OilComm presentations, you hear the IT OT convergence. I'm the OT guy, usually in the conversation. So I'm also a member of the OilComm Advisory Board. My degrees, I've got a master's degree in cybersecurity from the University of San Diego, an MBA from Oklahoma State, and an electrical engineering degree with an emphasis in telecoms from Louisiana Lafayette. Go Raging Cajuns.
Nice.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dennis, Tim, and both are extremely valuable members of our OilComm advisory board. They've been advising us on the show for a few years now. Tim, Dennis, last year, OilComm 2019, felt like it was 10 years ago. It was a completely different world. We had I think pretty stable oil price at $50 a barrel. We had a lot of demand, and none of us knew what this coronavirus thing was at all. It didn't really exist in our consciousness. What has changed in the last year? And talk to us a little bit about what the new normal is in your world.
Sure. So I thought I'd start out with one of my favorite quotes. Last time I used this quote was back in 2008. I was giving a presentation, ironically, on Wall Street about change management. Had nothing to do with the financial condition, but I led off my presentation with this because there were a lot of IT professionals from banking institutions in the room. And so I thought it was appropriate that I'd start off with a quote from Abe Lincoln that I found, and I thought it'd be very appropriate now. And it's, as you can read, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion as our case is anew. So we must think anew and act anew. And I think that could apply back to 2015 at the start of this downturn, but even more so now, it's very appropriate. Before we get into this slide, I'll just say this. With 9/11, the horrific events of 9/11, that changed how we fly forever. I can say my kids have never known what it's like to fly without having to take off your shoes, your belt, take your laptop, or my son likes to travel with his PlayStation 4. Why? I don't know, because we're going to a place where my nephew has a PlayStation 4. But he has to take all that out the bag, and all of that is normal. I would venture to say with this pandemic we're dealing with now, it is going to change how we do business forever. Hopefully, that is the case. So, with the pandemic framework, and I was in a meeting with Gartner, with a Gartner analyst, so I want to give them full credit. One of the things they talk about is you think about this whole pandemic experience in 3 phases: respond, recover, and renew. And that's what leads us to this new normal, whatever that turns out to be. So respond. For IT and OT professionals, we had to quickly shore up our business continuity plans or our pandemic plans, and that's how we responded. Now, some of you are faced with returning back to work. Diamond Offshore is already back at work in the office for the most part. And so we're recovering. This reopening of your businesses, this return to work also means, in some cases, restructuring. For example, this current environment has brought on, as you could probably read from the news, and this is not related just to oil and gas, a number of Chapter 11 filings where companies are restructuring their debt. Hertz recently announced Chapter 11. J.C. Penney. All these companies are now taking the opportunity not to say we're insolvent and we can't pay our debtors. They're saying we're going to file not Chapter 7, but Chapter 11 to restructure our debt so that we can come out of this downturn even stronger. And then there's the renew. Once you get on the other side of this, apologies for that, folks. Once you get on the other side of this, now you're going to start to look at reducing maybe your infrastructure footprint. Some companies, hate to bring it up, have reduced their workforce. But there's also the opportunity to retire some old technology and to reinvent some technology that might be out there. And that's what's going to lead to the new normal.
I agree, Tim. And part of that new normal right now, what will that be? Social distancing? How much will that continue? Shaking hands, air travel. We used to travel around the globe for meetings, and that could change substantially down to where we're doing, maybe the initial introductory meeting, but the continuous face-to-face type meetings, I think, are probably done, if not forever, at least for a long time.
Absolutely. One thing I'll bring up, well, I'll wait a slide or two, bring up another illustration of what Dennis and I are talking about when we talk about the new normal. This next slide is a slide from NASDAQ. I tried, as I was putting together this presentation, I kept updating it over the last week because I wanted to bring you fresh information and not lie to you as what the NASDAQ are doing. So please note this is from May 18th. But the reason I bring this slide up is to show you that stocks, tech stocks actually started benefiting from COVID-19. And what I mean benefiting, there's technology out there, for example, the video conferencing companies, Netflix, those stocks have started to actually go up. And I've actually heard that there are companies that are going to be specifically geared toward providing a technology, business, or service around COVID-19. Next slide, please. So an example, even on this yesterday, Zoom started to go down a little bit. Overall, if you look at it from a 6-month perspective, you can see from a trend analysis perspective that Zoom technology is going up. The stock price is actually going up because more and more people started to rely on it. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the challenges that Zoom encountered, but still, overall, you can see that this was a stock that was positively influenced. Same thing with Netflix. As more and more people stayed home, more and more people started using the service, investors said, there's opportunities. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, the oil index fund, and this is just one of them, ETF, where you can see that naturally where you have supply and demand. Well, first, oil and gas is commodity, is based, the price of oil is based off of three things, not just supply and demand, but also speculators on Wall Street. If there is what they say a dust up in the Middle East, doesn't impact supply or demand immediately, speculators start to raise our price up in oil and gas. So what this was affect is strictly demand. As COVID-19 took hold, the demand went down, prices went down with it. Supply went up, prices went down. This next one is oil production and consumption. As you can see, that dip is right when every company started to say, we're going to work from home. Government said we've got a stay in place order or shelter in place order. And so as that started to take hold in March, you can see that was the demand of oil went down, and the production of oil, of course, went down with it. Now, the forecast, and this comes from EIA, as people start to return to work, start to return to the office, get back to what they call this new normal, it goes without saying that demand would start to increase, which will impact supply, which will impact ultimately cost. Next slide, please.
Tim, just on the previous slide, I was going to say, in addition to the COVID-19 and the drop in supply, drop in demand, where everybody's staying home and not needing everything, the planes aren't flying, vehicles aren't driving. At the beginning of that, we also had a price war that happened.
Yeah.
And that's where Jeffrey earlier was talking about how that can kind of, part of it's separate. So when the Russia and Saudi Arabia and OPEC, I guess it's when you take OPEC plus, when they started to have their little price war, that also increased the amount of supply. So we had supply going up and we had demand going down at the same time. So it was actually in both directions, which is not a good place for those of us in oil and gas.
Exactly. This has been the longest projected downturn, cyclical downturn, at least since I've been associated with oil and gas. Started back in 2015. And Dennis, you're absolutely right. That double whammy just knocked a lot of us on our butts. Next slide, please. So historically, going back, looking at some technologies and some events that impacted our industry, you go back to the 1920s, Spindletop, down the road from us here in Houston, Texas, Beaumont. One of my favorite movies is There Will Be Blood. And if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie about the oil industry in the very, very early days and how dangerous it was when you start drilling. Back then, there was really no such thing as well control. You just kept drilling until you got the pressure out of the ground, and you would see those gushers shooting up from the derricks. What they didn't tell you is you lost a lot. You can imagine you lost a lot of product out of the ground until they could control the pressure. So what happened is Abercrombie, who was a former roustabout, and Henry Cameron of the very same company, Cameron, they developed a company called Cameron Iron Works. So that technology, there were lives started to be lost. As a result, the technology of blowout preventers started to take hold, and they patented sometime, I think it was around 1926. Another technology back in the 60s, late 60s, 3D seismic surveys. So perfected right up the road here, Friendswood Field near, again, here for those of us in the Houston area, started to enable the geologists and geophysicists to see what was below the ground by doing seismic surveys at that point. In 1995, the advent of 4D seismic surveys, the time component, looking at surveys over time and seeing did the reservoir shift? Was there something that changed? And again, that was something that was impactful and helped us to further changed our industry. And then in 2008, a lot of us are familiar with horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking. It's not always looked at in the news as something positive, but hydraulic fracking is something that is done safely in our industry. I don't think we always explain that well, but it is something that is done safely. And as a result, they used to be able to produce 30% of the reservoir that was in the ground. Hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling means you now are able to claim up to 60, 70% of the reservoir instead of leaving it underground. That created a situation where for the first time in our nation's history, we started producing more than the Middle East. Next slide. So this new normal, whatever it looks like from a technology standpoint, I think we can all admit there were some negative impacts that came with the new normal if this is what is going to be normal going forward. I like to call that first point life in 15 minutes. Some of you may have started working from home and found out that suddenly people were calling you at all times of the day, all times of the night. Just like with the advent of the pagers and the cell phones, suddenly you could be reached all the time. Well, either people didn't like their families very much. I don't know. I won't speculate on that. But we noticed a lot of people started working a lot more. And I call it, again, 15 minutes where I would literally have 15 minutes in between meetings. I support, part of my team is a global organization. So a lot of times my meetings would start at either 6 o'clock in the morning or 6:30. I would get off that call, have 15 minutes to eat breakfast, get ready for the next meeting, and bang, I'm off. And same thing would happen for lunch, ironically, and the same thing would happen even for dinner. Another negative impact, reduction in workforce. So with the downturn, obviously companies start to look at, if I can't make more money, I've got to decrease my expenses. And some of the companies are starting to experience reducing their workforce. And on the IT side, didn't mean you got rid of, if you reduced your workforce by 30%, didn't mean you reduced your technology stack by 30%. You just reduced the number of people supporting that same technology stack. Dennis, same on the OT?
Yeah, it's going to be similar once that hits, but the problem is stopping work. And it's hard in our space. I'm talking about IT and OT. Because when we're reducing people, we're also, if you think about offshore, we want to do more remote operations and more things remote so that you don't have to have as many people in the field. Well, that puts more reliance on the IT and OT people, because now our networks are more critical than they were, which are critical now, but they become even more critical. So yeah, as companies start to reduce those, the OT staff as well as the IT staff, that really does impact, because we become the systems become more critical, and yet you're doing it with fewer people. And for anybody that doesn't know, so when we're saying OT, we're talking about operational technology. We're talking about systems that are doing the critical infrastructure. Might be your control systems, or in my case, could be radar systems, emergency communications. It's in those systems that are basically going to be in the field as opposed to in the carpeted office.
Absolutely. You know, this next point before we go to the next slide, one of the things that this work from home has created some vulnerabilities. And I want to take a moment to plug one of the additional OilComm advisory board members who's going to be coming up on a future webcast, Damon Smalls. Talking to him in the OilComm advisory board meeting, I'm very excited to hear what he's going to present in that space. So while Damon and I have had enlightening conversations on panel discussion, board meeting or panel discussions, very much look forward to Damon bringing his perspective as well on that topic.
Absolutely, Tim, and Damon is monitoring this call. He's replied in the comments a couple times, so yeah, looking forward to it, Damon.
Same here. Next slide. So this is, I'm sure Damon's going to do this justice, but again, Dennis and I are just going to touch on it. One of the articles I received via an app I have, OilComm, oilprice.com. This came across my desk. And what this is directly impacting is the fact that hackers look for weaknesses. They see companies struggling. They see people working from home. They know the home infrastructure is not as well built out as it is in the office. And now suddenly you may have an increase of phishing emails, which this article did indicate at the time. There was a noticeable increase in phishing emails that started being noticed and coming out and hitting companies. Next slide. So this is a slide that, while watching, giving full credit to Mike Curventino, watching CNBC Squawk Box, he's the former CISO for Twitter. He noted a couple of things that we all need to be aware of. And as I started putting my thoughts together for this webinar, I thought I would highlight them because they were excellent points. Video conferencing systems. We have all noticed, not on this call, thank goodness, but we have all noticed delays. We've noticed pixelation. We've noticed the weakness of trying to do large video conferencing from home. The family internet routers, they are not commercial grade. And I'm not saying that there are a lot of weaknesses, but if a hacker finds it, he will exploit it. We are now sharing our network, our company information with our children's gaming system, which I don't know about you, but that certainly puts a chill down my spine, knowing that my son is upstairs over my head and playing his PlayStation 4 with God, who knows who. Now, the interesting thing is, per Mike Curventino, he's saying the cost for employers to secure their employees' home workspaces is going to cost between $247 and almost $1,700 per employee. If you think about it, that could be a lot of money in order to secure someone's home network.
Tim, this is Jeff. I just want to jump in. What are some of the costs associated? Like, what are those costs going towards? That just software protection, or is that completely new hardware?
So,
Go ahead, Jeff.
no, I was just going to say, one, you may find that you need to deploy a Cisco umbrella, OpenDNS. It's a web filter agent. You deploy it to every laptop. And so it's always running. So even if you're not on your network at work, that soon as you get onto your own Wi-Fi, you've got the protection of a web filter. Another cost may be if a company doesn't have multi-factor authentication. You want to make sure that your employees are authenticating via two-factor authentication. Dennis, any other thoughts on?
Yeah, because some of it could also be hardware. It could be that you have to actually purchase some type of security hardware for the individuals at their houses. I think as we look at the bring your own device environment that we've kind of started moving into anyway, and it's work from anywhere, with the device that you have. I think we were already headed down that direction in some regard, but you still have the fact that how secure is that home router? Is it those of us that know a little bit, we would never do this, but how many people take it out of the box, plug it in, and good to go, and you log in, and it's password, admin password is your login credentials, right? And that's where you really get concerned.
Yep, absolutely. And I see one of the comments, Shane is saying there's tax reforms that allows employees to remove write-offs from home offices. Well, I won't venture down that road, but yes, more cost to enable people to work from home. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the positives. One of my second favorite quotes, Winston Churchill, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Next slide. So the crisis I'd say we are currently in, it's that IT, we came out looking like knights in shining armor. A lot of CEOs, business leaders around our companies, they were impressed by our ability to respond. There's always a saying, don't fight your last war in the Army. Sorry, I know you're a Marine, but I believe in the Army.
You already talked about that.
So a quick story for me, I was at another company and H1N1 hit. And what I did, I said, we need more laptops. We need air cards. We need cell phones. And we started providing air cards, laptops, all of that equipment to people who really didn't need it. This time around, I was a little bit smarter about it. I said to the business unit, who really needs to work from home? Or do we really need to give the receptionist a laptop? Can we not use our call-in service? So again, IT, and I'm not bragging on myself, but I will tell you, IT across the board, I've heard this from my counterparts, CIOs from other companies. They have all said, including my own, they really appreciated our response to our pandemic plan, or our response to allow and enable the employees, contractors to work from home. Another positive is the business continuity plans. We had to test them in real time, excuse me. And so some companies, I know they didn't even have a pandemic plan. Here on the Gulf Coast, we are so focused on hurricanes.
Hurricane season starts Monday.
Yes. Yeah. And from the fire into the frying pan, or whatever the saying goes. Yeah, we are so focused on hurricanes. I think maybe some companies were developing a pandemic plan. So that was a positive. Work from home technology. Question for many of you in your companies: is it here to stay? I have certainly heard from some CEOs on the East Coast where you can imagine that real estate in Manhattan is very, very expensive. So now that they've proven they can work from home, they are looking at whether they permanently put that in place. One of my counterparts here in the Houston area, he told me they are going back on, I think it's mid-June, possibly July. And he said even once that time frame hits, they're going to stagger the departments so that part of the department is working from home, the other half of the department is in the office, and then they'll alternate. Technology. So it made us more productive. You know, I say this tongue in cheek, but I'll skip to that second bullet point. There's no meetings after the meeting. You know how you're in a conference room and
it
people.
doesn't always happen, Tim, because I get people calling me as soon as the calls are over. I'm taking my headset off, and all of a sudden the phone's ringing. I'm like, come on.
Exactly.
Say how you really feel, call. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not as bad as it is in you're right, in the office where you never make it out the door.
Exactly. But I will say this, meetings, hopefully you guys have found this out to be true. Meetings started on time. You know, when you have a video call meeting, it starts at 9 o'clock. Boom, people are starting to log in.
We're also trying to start to shorten meetings. So we're going in and putting our calendars at, instead of 1 hour default meetings, 45 minutes or 50 minutes, so that there is that space, and we're giving ourselves that space between calls.
Yes. Like 15 minutes, hopefully.
Yeah.
More, no less.
When you get to 25-minute call after 25-minute call, you get a 5-minute gap, but still, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I will share this with you guys. I literally had a 10-minute meeting. To Dennis's point, it was set up for an hour. Got online with some guys from Australia, one of our vendors. Had my architecture guys in there, my director of global infrastructure. They had their guys in there. We met, we talked, and in 20 minutes, we were done.
Hey, Tim, we got a question here by Post 7 Rock. There we go. So what are some of the challenges that you see as far as crew welfare in remote? I tell you, one of the things that we're running into is that people are taking longer shifts. And part of that is just because of the rotation, and it may not be completely longer shifts. Well, they are longer shifts on the asset, but there's also quarantine time beforehand. So we've enforced some 2 weeks of quarantine plus testing, and then you can go offshore. But the question here is about crew welfare and challenges. I've got to say that we haven't experienced any, because the traffic on our networks, we've been adding bandwidth. So it hasn't, if you're running at 10%, 15% of the available bandwidth, when you do get into those into a situation like this where people are having to, do more crew welfare, it's increased, and we're doing a lot more video conferences. It's increased, but we haven't suffered from that.
I'll also add to that, Dennis, and I won't give a plug to any one VSAT provider, but there are VSAT providers that provide crew welfare, a separate dish.
Right.
Takes off the load from your own the company business and OT operations network. that's vitally important and allows those employees, that crew member, to actually dial or use a separate. And there's different versions of that where they can.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that service, Tim. A lot of I forget, you guys are most of the time you're on a drill ship somewhere and you're using satellite to communicate. I'm in a fortunate, a lot of places I either have microwave or have fiber optics. So there is a difference there. Even in remote, in the Gulf of Mexico, we've got fiber, we've got it in the Caspian Sea and stuff. So that's different than having to run strictly on the satellites. And yes, there is one provider that does that. I would think that and this is just me talking off the top of my head, so this isn't any type of gospel of anything, but with the cruise lines not operating, there's got to be a lot of extra bandwidth that's available if we needed it coming in from those satellite providers.
Yep. One other thing under the topic of technology made us more productive, I'd say this: some of the technology has been there in terms of video conferencing, being able to share your screen. But I think we're getting better as humans to use the technology. Another quick story: my sister is a speech pathologist, and with COVID-19, the schools are closed down, but she is, working for the Board of Education in the city she's in, she has to do a Google Meet meeting with her students. And yesterday in our family FaceTime, because I'm the IT guy in the family, those questions, not that I imagine that doesn't happen to anybody else on this webinar, but she started peppering me with questions on how to use YouTube and Google Meet effectively. And, I gave her some ideas, but a lot of times users are resourceful enough to figure that stuff out, and they'll start to figure out things that we in IT that enable this technology hasn't even thought of. So we become better at using the technology that's even already out there.
Yeah, Tim, I just wanted to jump. That's an interesting point you make, not just for our industry, but for all industries. I mean, there's one thing that COVID-19 pandemic did was it forced everybody to learn new applications, video conferencing. If you weren't dependent on it before, I mean, you basically had an emergency education on how to do things remotely and getting on board with contactless operations.
Jeff, you're absolutely right. The majority of folks have probably been on audio conferences, but didn't use video conferencing and all the things, the whiteboard and the sharing of screens.
I had to take the sticker off of my camera, so
you slid it to the.
Yeah, I normally kept that closed, but yeah.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So talk about new and improved technology. Again, Zoom was already out there, but exposed a weakness. So what did Zoom do right in the midst of all this pandemic crisis? They acquired Keybase, a security firm that will improve their end-to-end encryption. Another advancement or improved technology, this was, again, more from the human standpoint, increased security awareness and procedures. One of the things, and this is not maybe just related to oil and gas, but one of the things with hackers attacking us, now, again, as I mentioned earlier, we start to think of technology. And again, Damon will help. I saw him earlier. Appreciate my comment about enlightenment. He will truly do that. I'm convinced of that, on technologies that will help keep us safe. One of my counterparts, a CIO, they had no problem working from home. Why? Because they were 100% cloud-based organization. However, that now begs the question, does he has a CASB in place to help monitor who's gaining access to his cloud-based applications? And then question more specific to this audience of OilComm. One of the articles I got was I get alerts from our director of security, not so much IT security, but he handles our physical security here in the building, offshore rigs, and he gets alerts. And one of the alerts, he said that there was a potential vulnerability with someone getting your information, communicating over VSAT.
Tim, I can talk to that a little bit because I was actually at the CyberSat conference last November and was approached by an individual talking about that. And they had basically taken off the shelf hardware and went out and started listening to satellite communications. And they captured some from oil and gas companies. And they published a paper on it. So that is something. When you talk to the VSAT providers, a lot of times they have the capability of doing encryption, but unless we ask them to, they're not going to do it by default. And then we also have the encryption that we can do ourselves, right? Endpoint encryption across those links. But most of the time, or traditionally, that hasn't been done. We're just buying a pipe, just like you're buying a telephone line. The difference is anybody can put up a little dish and listen to it. So, that's definitely something that's critical.
Scary stuff. You talk about new and improved technology. You start to think, what about technology that's going to decrease human interaction in tight spaces? I jokingly put this up, where are all our drones and driverless cars? I'm expecting, Pizza Hut to just drop my pizza off with a drone or actually, I believe one of them, Domino's, actually was testing here in the Houston area a driverless car. I did not see any of that during the month of March. However, I am convinced that this whole event will now spur more technology, more investments in that.
The problem, Tim, was getting the pizza from the driverless car up to your doorstep and ringing the doorbell.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't contemplate that we wouldn't come out of our house. The other thing, this was interesting, was mobile apps. So if there is contact, you've heard in the news about contact tracing, that might be short-lived. That might not be a new normal, but that might be short-lived. But also there is an interesting app that I saw that a hospital was using. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk more about it. So the way this app worked is that you go to a website that your company is hosting, and you simply answer a couple of questions, whether you have symptoms, whether you have fever, whether you have, a headache, runny nose. And as you click through any of those, it eventually returns to you something like what you see on the screen, a cleared for work pass. And you would go up to the security guard at your office and you would show him that and say, see, I was cleared for work. I thought that was pretty interesting that that technology had came about so quickly in the midst of all this COVID. So there might be, as a result of this, technology, mobile apps that spur this kind of innovation. Next slide. Here's an app that I won't again make, since nobody's paying me to do a commercial for the name of the app. But it's an app that I will say that we do use here, and it allows the users, what we found when you have to change your password and you're remoted into the network via a VPN connection, it was hard to do to change your own password. You would have to call the help desk. We enabled technology that allows the users to not call the help desk and to reset your password or to unlock your account with a VPN tunnel application right on your phone. So that was something that was out there. But again, in the work from home environment, we pretty much rushed our testing and started looking at technology like this to make people more efficient about working from home. So there are challenges. And again, Dennis and I are not here with a crystal ball saying what's going to be normal. We just anticipate that there are going to be some new norms, and with that comes challenges. So again, supporting work from home employees, short-term and long-term. There's challenges we as IT professionals will face. Are there policies in place for work from home, and which jobs qualify? Not everybody is qualified to work from home. For example, if you work in the mailroom and you go on to the company network from time to time, that doesn't mean your job, you can work from home. You have to physically be in the office. But there's, again, some policies that companies will now have to anticipate. For example, sick days, your HSC policies. If somebody gets hurt at home, does that count against your TRIR, your total recordable incident rate? I would think it does, but those kind of things need to start to be spelled out.
But does it only in certain times?
Yeah, that's true.
Because if I go out inside and get a ladder and I'm cutting branches off my tree, like I saw a neighbor do the other day, just shaking my head, because those always fall, right? I mean, that's when it falls. If you were injured in something like that, then it can't be a recordable incident against work, even if you were doing that on a break in lunch in work hours. So there has to be some type of rules that are written against that.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings about a whole different set of questions that companies now need to contemplate. Will there be further consolidation of companies in the oil and gas industry? Again, we promised you at the top of this, we were not going to really make any pronouncements on this $20 barrel of oil here to stay or anything like that. I will just say this as an example. When the airline industry went through this, there was a consolidation of airline companies that started to happen during their downturn. For example, United and Continental.
Right.
So I would venture to say that we will probably see that, which means there will be fewer jobs, and you'll start to, like with any merger and acquisition scenario, you're going to have a clash of cultures. Compaq and HP. I was famously told the story as half the building still had red ID cards and the other half had blue, and never to the other two meet. I don't know how true that is. That's just what someone who worked there shared with me. But the culture, the technology, all of that now has to start to work together. And again, we already talked about the cybersecurity threats that are a little bit different now for people working from home.
Well, we're increasing our attack surface, right? So if everyone in the office is working through a single set of routers to the networks, you have one entry point. Now we've just distributed that entry point across every employee that's logged in from home, such as myself right here. So.
Exactly.
Hey, before we get too far, Tim, Jeffrey asked a question about cellular service. And I think what I would, it says outside of offshore rigs, we are deploying cellular service on our fixed assets in several locations. And not just BP, but some of the other majors. And we're also going to be extending that if your vessels are operating within 30 miles, of our platforms where you could do backhaul via cellular as well. Right now, that's all 4G with the evolution to some 5G. You guys really need to do a lot of research on 5G to understand, when you get into those millimeter waves and you talk about big steel structures, it doesn't work. Too much reflection. So what we're looking at, though, is moving to cellular services. Now, I can tell you from my house, when I pick up my phone and I'm sitting in a suburb of Houston and I have one bar, that doesn't cut it. But we are starting to see the use of cellular networks in various oil fields, onshore and offshore. So, Jeffrey, I hope that answers your question. All right, Tim.
All right. Next slide. Okay, we have before we go to that, I think we have another question that popped up because I didn't allow a lot of time for Q&A, so I guess let's take some of those.
I think that was,
if you have a question, ask it, and we'll try to get to it in the next few minutes here. But
yeah. All right, Tim.
If not, Damon will answer them.
That's right. We'll leave it to Damon.
So, some of the things, recommendations, do a SWOT analysis on your pandemic plan. What were your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? These are some examples, not again necessarily related to Diamond or BP, but some just talking to some of my peers that came up in several conversations, or even some of the webinars I listened to, didn't participate in. Next slide. So again, do a SWOT analysis. Re-examine your business impact analysis plan. Great time again, as Dennis mentioned, we've got hurricane season upon us. Great time to do it now, early in the season if you haven't done it already. Look at your technology stack and make sure it's covering emerging, again, cybersecurity threats, and increase your cybersecurity awareness program. Make sure if you're going to send your users home with a laptop VPN connection, make sure they're using it appropriately. Short term, is there technology to adapt to address the company's COVID-19 concerns? Again, I showed that app on the phone that a hospital was using to ensure that people were coming to work without any symptoms. Now, that's kind of the honor system, but still, it's something to be considered. And then longer term, if you had an unlimited budget, unlimited resources, what would you do? Start to plan now. I had a conversation with my boss and I said, you get on the other side of this downturn, and one of the things that concerns me as an IT professional, especially with this prolonged downturn in the market, are we as an industry, IT, OT, ready to flip the switch and start to be innovative? We've been working so hard and so long as, let's save money here, let's get rid of this app. We've got fewer employees, so let's do this. But when the money starts coming in, are we ready to grow? So those are just some of the things I wanted to share with you. And Dennis,
I was just going to go back to just thinking about the previous statement about work injuries at home, work injuries, right? Ergonomics, because we are working from home using company supplied systems. How are the ergonomics for the individual workers? Because that would, somebody develops carpal tunnel because of the keyboard situation, or they're trying to use a laptop without proper stands. And my laptop's up on a stand, and they're bent over, hunched over, back pain. All of those actually become workman's comp stuff, along with the technology that we're using for working from home.
Absolutely. We didn't, again, Jeff, have much time for questions, but I think Dennis and I will entertain a few more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you want to ask Dennis or Tim a quick question before we wrap up, please leave it in the comment section. But one quick question I had for both of you was, is there any advice that you would give to your tech and communications technology suppliers who want to keep doing business in this market? What advice would you give to your suppliers in supporting your needs right now?
Let Dennis.
Well, right now we don't have a whole lot of. We're not spending much money right now, Jeffrey. Now the problem is with not spending. That's a very short-term solution, but a lot of our projects are on hold for a period of time, which it makes it very difficult, right? So, and by suppliers, I could even be talking about temps, right? So when there's an increase in supply and a drop in demand, we don't need to be drilling as many wells. And if we're not drilling many wells, Tim's company, not just us, but I mean, Tim's company is suffering, right? Because they don't, we're still producing our existing wells, but they need to be drilling new ones. And the same thing, I'm not going to be buying more software right now. I'm not going to be buying more radios. Everything is going to be focused on keeping things running until either the price of oil gets up or we've cut enough cost where everything's balanced. And that's going to be the same for anybody. You either have to have your revenue up or your costs down. And then you can start looking at how do you attack these new situations. Do we need to spend $225 per employee to get them more secure, right? And who are those employees that we want to do that with? Are there other ways to do it internally? So there's a lot of that stuff I think that we can look at.
Yeah, Dennis is absolutely right. On the other end, again, Dennis is the dog, and we are the tail. His company is the dog, and we are the tail. So if Dennis and his company is drilling new wells, exploratory wells, we now have money for R&D on our side. But again, you look further up the blockchain, and if we're at $45, $50 per barrel of oil again, now his R&D starts to expand, which comes back to us and says, okay, we need you as a drilling contractor to do X, Y, and Z. And then as a drilling contractor, we're going to our VSAT provider saying, we need you now to do X, Y, and Z. Give us more bandwidth, less cost, or any kind of new innovations like that. So again, we're all in this together, and we all need the price of oil to go up, obviously.
Great.
Well, it's at $35 now, so maybe hopefully another 10 or 15 when you start to get back to what was considered normal before.
Yeah, talking to another one of our advisory board members who's in the onshore markets, right? He said they'll start drilling again at about 44, 45 in that space is when they'll start doing more drilling. So it's really going to depend on each company, what their cost structure is, and so what their lifting cost is. All things considered, will determine how they start moving.
Well, thank you so much, Tim, Dennis. I know we're over time now, but before everybody goes, just want to let you know we're actually going to continue this discussion with the next webcast that we do. It's called Charting the Uncharted Waters. How and when do we restart operations appropriately? That'll be Wednesday, June 3rd. So check in with that because we'll be continuing this. We knew we weren't going to be able to cover everything in this 1 hour. These webcasts are going to be previewing what we're going to be talking about at OilComm in October. So you just want to thank you all for joining us. And if you want to hear more about this, please join us in October for OilComm 2020. Tim, Dennis, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Tim, for that awesome presentation. And if any of you have questions that you want answered or you wanted to pass along to Tim or Dennis, you can email me directly. I can pass them along to our advisory board members. My email is jhill, JHILL, @accessintel.com. I think my contact information is also up on the OilComm website. It's oilcomm.com. So thank you all for joining us. We hope you enjoy this webcast, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Dennis.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your support, guys.
Yep, absolutely.